It was supposed to be a simple overnight hike. Just me, my best friend Josh, and his girlfriend Emily. We had done this trail before. Appalachian woods, deep in the heart of Pennsylvania. Beautiful, but isolated. The kind of place where cell service is a joke and the silence at night is absolute. Josh was the one who suggested we go back, saying we never really explored the old fire tower we had seen last time. It had been abandoned for decades, left to rot in the thick of the forest. We were supposed to set up camp nearby, check it out, and head back in the morning. Simple plan. I remember feeling uneasy as soon as we stepped onto the trail. The trees were dense, the air thick, and the deeper we hiked, the quieter it got. I don't mean peaceful quiet, I mean an unnatural stillness, like the forest itself was listening. No birds, no rustling leaves, just the sound of our footsteps crunching on the dirt path. Emily noticed it too. "It's too quiet," she muttered. Josh laughed it off. "Come on, it's just the wilderness. It's supposed to be quiet." But he was wrong. Nature isn't silent. Something else was. We reached the fire tower just before sunset. The structure stood tall and skeletal against the deepening sky, its rusted metal ladder stretching high into the darkness above, a relic of a forgotten past. "Let's check it out," Josh said, already heading toward it. I didn't want to. Everything in my gut told me we shouldn't, but I wasn't about to be the coward. So I followed. The inside was worse than I expected. Graffiti-covered walls, splintered wooden steps, the stench of rot. As we climbed, the wind howled through the cracks, creating a low, whistling moan. Halfway up, Emily stopped. "Do you hear that?" We froze. A shuffling sound. Not the wind. Not us. Something else. Below. Josh shined his flashlight down the staircase, but there was nothing there, just darkness and shadows stretching unnaturally against the walls. And then we heard it. A voice. A woman's voice. Whispering. Calling. "Help me." The sound crawled up my spine. It didn't echo like it should have. It was too close, too intimate, like it was right behind us. Emily clutched my arm. "We need to go. Now." Josh hesitated, but then we heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, ascending the stairs beneath us. I have never felt terror like that before. It was primal, all-consuming. We bolted. The three of us rushed down, nearly tripping over each other in our panic. When we hit the ground, I risked a glance back. A figure stood halfway up the tower. A woman. Pale, with hollow eyes, her mouth open in a silent scream. And then she moved. Not walked, not ran. She shifted like her body flickered in and out of existence. One second she was at the top of the stairs, the next she was at the bottom. We ran. We didn't stop, didn't look back. Branches tore at our clothes, our faces, but we didn't care. We sprinted down the trail, lungs burning, adrenaline driving us forward. But the woods weren't right anymore. The trail felt wrong, twisted. No matter how far we ran, it was like we weren't getting anywhere. The trees loomed taller, their twisted branches stretching like skeletal fingers. Then Emily screamed. I turned, and she was gone. Just gone. One second she was running beside me, and the next, she wasn't. Josh lost it, yelling her name, darting into the trees, searching. I grabbed him, trying to stop him. "We have to stay on the trail." But the trail was gone. The path we had been running on had vanished, swallowed by the forest. And then we saw her. Emily stood a few feet ahead, but something was wrong. Her back was to us, her posture rigid, unmoving. Josh took a step toward her. "Emily?" She didn't respond. I grabbed his arm. "That's not her." He shook me off and moved closer. "Emily, we have to." Her head jerked, not turned, jerked like something snapped inside her neck. Then she grinned, but it wasn't Emily's smile. It was too wide, too stretched. And her eyes, they weren't hers. They were empty. "Josh," she whispered. Her voice was layered, Emily's, but something else beneath it, something older, hungrier. He stopped, realization dawning on his face. Then, in an instant, she lunged. I grabbed Josh and pulled him back as Emily, or whatever had taken her, screeched, the sound inhuman, raw. Her body contorted, her limbs bending at impossible angles. We ran. Again. This time, we didn't stop until we saw the lights of our car in the distance. We didn't question how we got back to the trailhead, didn't question why the trees seemed to shift behind us, closing in. We just drove. We never found Emily. The police searched for weeks. No body. No trace. Just gone. Josh never recovered. He stopped talking about it, stopped hiking altogether. Last I heard, he moved out west, somewhere far from the woods. As for me, I still hear her voice sometimes. At night, in my dreams. Help me. And I know, whatever we saw that night in the fire tower, it isn't done with me yet.
Story number 2.
I don't go hiking anymore, not after what happened to me in the Ozarks last fall. I was alone, which was my first mistake. I had done plenty of solo hikes before, but this trail was different, deeper into the wilderness than I had ever gone. I wanted solitude, a challenge, something to clear my head. Instead, I found something that still haunts me. It started around midday. I was about 5 miles in when I noticed the silence. No birds, no rustling leaves, nothing. Just my own footsteps crunching on the dirt path. It was the kind of quiet that makes your skin prickle, like something is watching. Then I saw the footprints. They were fresh, right on the trail in front of me, but they weren't mine. I hadn't seen another hiker all day, and these prints, they were barefoot, human, and they just appeared as if someone had started walking in the middle of the trail. I stopped, scanning the trees. Nothing. Just that awful pressing silence. I should have turned around right then, but I didn't. I kept walking, following the footprints. They led me deeper, past the marked trail into an area I didn't recognize. The trees grew denser, their branches twisted like gnarled fingers. Then I found the cabin. It was old, nearly swallowed by the forest, its wooden walls warped with age. The door hung slightly open. I don't know why, but I stepped inside. The air was thick, heavy with the smell of damp wood and something else, something rotten. The floor was covered in dirt and dead leaves, like no one had been inside for years. But there was something else. A single chair sat in the middle of the room. On it, a bundle of old, yellowed cloth, and sticking out from the cloth, a human jawbone. I felt my stomach lurch. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, coming from just outside the cabin. I barely breathed. My mind screamed at me to run, but my body was frozen. Then, in the doorway, I saw it. A figure. Tall, impossibly thin, its skin pale and stretched too tight over its bones. Its head was tilted at an unnatural angle, eyes wide hollow. And its mouth. It grinned. Not like a person grins. This was wrong. Too wide, too many teeth. Then it spoke. Not with words. With my voice. It echoed back my own breathing, my own muttered curses perfectly, like it had been listening to me the whole time. I ran. I don't remember how I made it back to my car. The forest twisted around me, the trees shifting like they were alive. The whole time, I could hear it behind me, those footsteps, that awful mimicry of my own voice, repeating my gasps, my sobs. I didn't stop until I reached my car. I locked the doors, hands shaking, barely able to get the key in the ignition. My headlights flashed across the trees as I peeled out onto the dirt road, and there it was, standing just at the edge of the forest, smiling, mimicking the sound of my car engine perfectly. I don't hike anymore, and at night, sometimes I still hear it.
Story number 3.
I never believed in ghosts. Not really. I figured the stories were just campfire tales, the kind of thing people tell to make the woods seem more dangerous than they really are. I thought the scariest thing I could encounter out there was a bear, or maybe a bad fall. I was wrong. It was late October when my friends and I decided to do one last hike before winter. There were 4 of us, me, my best friend Mark, his girlfriend Sarah, and her brother Daniel. We picked a trail deep in the Smoky Mountains, one that was rumored to be haunted. People said hikers went missing there, that the woods played tricks on your mind. We laughed it off. We weren't superstitious. The trail was beautiful. Covered in orange and red leaves, the air crisp with the bite of approaching winter. We hiked for hours, eventually reaching a clearing where we set up camp. As night fell, we built a fire and sat around it, telling stories and roasting marshmallows. That's when we heard the laughter. It came from the trees behind us, soft, distant, a child's laugh. We all froze. There was no way a kid would be out here this late. We were miles from the nearest road. Sarah forced a laugh. Probably just the wind, but we all knew that wasn't the wind. Mark grabbed a flashlight and shined it toward the trees. "Hello?" he called. Silence. Then the laugh came again, closer this time. Daniel stood up. Maybe someone's messing with us. But there was no one. Then something moved in the darkness. A shadow, darting between the trees, too fast to be human. The laughter stopped. A cold wind blew through the clearing, snuffing out our fire. Everything went black. Sarah screamed. I scrambled for my flashlight, my hands shaking as I clicked it on. The beam cut through the dark, and for a second I saw something standing at the edge of the woods. A child. But not really. Its face was wrong. Pale, sunken eyes, a mouth stretched too wide in an unnatural grin. It had no lips, just rows of jagged teeth. And then it moved. 1 second, it was at the tree line. The next, it was right in front of me. I stumbled back, dropping my flashlight. In the brief flicker before it hit the ground, I saw its hands, long clawed fingers blackened like they had been burned. Then I heard Mark yell, "Run!" We ran. Branches slapped against my face as I sprinted blindly through the forest. I could hear it behind us, moving fast, too fast. The laughter returned, echoing all around us. It wasn't just one voice anymore. It was many. We reached the trailhead, panting, barely able to breathe, and then Mark cursed. Daniel was gone. We turned back, calling his name, but there was no answer. The woods were silent again, waiting. Then my flashlight flickered back to life, and we saw him. Daniel stood a few feet away, deep in the trees, but he wasn't moving. His back was to us, his posture stiff, like something was holding him up. "Daniel?" Sarah whispered. He didn't respond. Mark took a step forward, but I grabbed his arm. "Don't." Something was wrong. Then Daniel twitched, a sharp, jerking movement like a puppet on strings, and he laughed. But it wasn't his laugh. It was the same child's laugh we had heard before. Sarah started crying. "Daniel, please." He turned his head slightly, just enough for us to see his face. His eyes were black, empty voids, his mouth pulled into that same horrible grin. Then the shadows behind him shifted. Something else was there. Tall, thin, with hollow eyes and too many fingers. Its hand was wrapped around Daniel's shoulder, its long nails digging into his skin. We ran. We didn't stop until we reached the car. Mark fumbled with the keys, his hands shaking so badly he could barely get the door open. We piled inside, locked the doors, and sped down the dirt road, not daring to look back. Daniel was gone. The search teams never found him. No footprints. No sign that he had ever been there at all. But sometimes, late at night, I hear laughter outside my window, and I know it's him, or at least what's left of him.
Story number 4.
I never should have gone back to that trail. I first hiked it years ago with my older brother Jake. It was deep in the Rockies, a remote, winding path that only experienced hikers dared to take. The locals warned us about it, said people got lost out there, said the forest didn't like intruders. We laughed it off, but by the end of that trip, only I came back. Jake vanished on that trail. 1 second, he was right ahead of me, and the next, he was gone. No sound, no struggle, just gone. I searched for hours, screaming his name until my voice was raw. The rescue team combed the woods for weeks, but found nothing. No footprints, no signs of an animal attack. It was like the forest had swallowed him whole. I spent years trying to forget, trying to move on. But last month, I got a message. It was a voicemail. No caller ID, just static at first, and then a voice I hadn't heard in years. "Help me." It was Jake. His voice was distant, broken, like it was coming from somewhere deep underground. I barely slept that night. My mind told me it was impossible, some sick prank, but my gut knew better. Jake was out there, and he was still alive. I packed my gear, grabbed a satellite phone, and drove back to that cursed trail. I was going to find him. The forest was exactly as I remembered. Cold, quiet, suffocating. No birds, no wind, just that awful, pressing silence. I followed the same path we had taken years ago, but I marking my steps, retracing every turn. As the sun dipped lower, shadows stretched unnaturally long like they were reaching for me. And then I saw them. Footprints. Fresh, barefoot tracks leading off the trail into the dense trees. I knew I should turn back. Every instinct screamed at me to leave. But then I heard it. "Help me." Jake's voice. Close. I ran. Branches whipped against my face as I crashed through the underbrush. The footprints led to a clearing, and in the center stood a small wooden cabin. It wasn't on any map. It shouldn't have been there. The door was slightly open. Inside, the air was thick, humid. The smell of damp wood and something rotten filled my lungs. My flashlight flickered, casting long, twitching shadows. And then I saw him. Jake. Sitting in the corner, his back to me. His clothes were tattered, his skin pale and stretched thin over his bones. I stepped forward. "Jake?" He didn't move. My stomach twisted. Something wasn't right. "Help me," he whispered. But his lips didn't move. The voice came from behind me. I spun, my flashlight shaking. The doorway was empty. Then Jake stood up, or something wearing his skin did. His movements were wrong, jerky, unnatural, like a marionette on invisible strings. "Help me," he said again, but now the voice was layered, his, and something deeper, something ancient. His head twitched, his jaw stretching open wider than any human mouth should, and then he lunged. I stumbled back, barely dodging his grasp. The thing that looked like my brother twisted, its limbs bending at impossible angles, its eyes hollow, black voids. I ran. I don't know how I found the trail again. The forest seemed to shift, closing in around me, trying to keep me trapped. I could hear it behind me, whispering, laughing, mimicking my own gasping breaths. Then I saw the lights of my truck. I jumped in, locked the doors, and peeled out of there, my hands white-knuckled on the wheel. As I sped away, I looked in the rearview mirror, and I saw Jake, standing at the edge of the trees, smiling. I don't know what I brought back with me that night, but sometimes when I'm alone, I hear his voice. Help me, and I know it's not him.
Story number 5.
I don't hike anymore, not after what happened last summer. My friend Nate and I had always loved exploring remote trails, finding places where no one else dared to go. We weren't afraid of the wilderness. We thought we knew it, but we didn't. We had heard about an abandoned trail deep in the Appalachian Mountains, one that didn't appear on any official maps. It was known as the Devil's Ridge Trail. No one could agree on why it was abandoned, only that those who went looking for it either came back terrified or didn't come back at all. That should have been enough to keep us away, but it wasn't. We packed our gear and drove out there, using an old hiker's journal we found online as our guide. It took hours of searching before we finally found the unmarked path. It was overgrown, barely recognizable as a trail, the trees so thick they blocked out most of the daylight. We stepped in anyway. From the very start, something felt wrong. There was no sound, no birds, no insects. Even our footsteps seemed muted. It felt like the forest was holding its breath, waiting. Nate laughed, trying to shake the unease. Creepy, right? I forced a grin. Just a little. We kept walking. The deeper we went, the stranger things became. The trees grew twisted, their branches bending in unnatural ways, almost like they were reaching for us. And then we started finding things. Small wooden carvings hanging from the branches, figures made of twigs and bone, some shaped like people, others less recognizable. This is messed up, Nate muttered, but he didn't stop moving, neither did I. Hours passed, and the trail seemed endless, stretching on, winding back on itself like it was leading us in circles. Then we heard it. A whistle. Soft, distant, coming from somewhere ahead. It wasn't the wind, it was deliberate, human. We stopped, listening. Another whistle, closer this time. Nate exhaled. Maybe there's someone else out here. Who the hell would be hiking this trail? I whispered. Then from the trees beside us, the whistle came again. But this time it was right next to my ear. I spun, my heart slamming against my ribs. There was no one there. The forest was empty. Nate grabbed my arm. We need to go back. I nodded, my pulse hammering, and we turned around, heading back the way we came. Only the trail wasn't the same anymore. The path was narrower, the trees pressing closer. The air had turned thick, heavy, almost suffocating. It was getting dark, too fast. It didn't make sense. Then I noticed something. The carvings. They were different. Before, they had been scattered randomly along the trail. Now they were all the same. All of them were hanging upside down. And then the whistling started again. But now it was all around us, coming from the trees, coming from behind us, coming from ahead. A dozen voices whistling in unison, perfectly synchronized. Then Nate screamed. I turned and saw something step out from the trees. It looked like a man, tall, gaunt, wrapped in ragged clothes. But his face, there wasn't one, just smooth, featureless skin where his eyes, nose, and mouth should have been. The whistling didn't stop. The thing raised a hand and pointed at us. And then the forest erupted. Shadows moved between the trees, figures, dozens of them, faceless, their bodies jerking and twitching like broken marionettes. We ran. Branches clawed at my arms, my legs, but I didn't stop. The whistling followed us, never breaking rhythm. We should have reached the car by now. We should have seen the road, but the forest stretched on forever. The path twisted beneath our feet, changing, warping. Then Nate tripped. I turned back, reaching for him, but he wasn't on the ground. He was gone. Vanished. Like he had never been there at all. I screamed his name, my voice swallowed by the endless whistling. And then I saw them. The carvings hanging from the trees. They weren't carvings anymore. They were people. Hanging. Dozens of them. Their bodies swaying gently, their faces blank, featureless. One of them had Nate's jacket. I ran until my legs gave out, collapsing onto the forest floor. The whistling had stopped. The world was silent again. And then I was standing at my car. Just like that. No transition. No memory of getting there. I spun around, but the trail was gone. There was nothing but empty road behind me. I waited for hours. I called Nate's phone 100 times. It was never answered. The search teams never found him. No trace. No footprints. Just gone. They told me he probably got lost, that maybe he fell. But I know the truth. I hear the whistling at night, and I know they took him.
Story number 6.
I used to love hiking alone. Something about the silence of the woods, the crisp air, the feeling of being completely isolated. It was freeing, peaceful, until I found the trail that wasn't supposed to be there. It was late October, and I had decided to take one last solo trip before winter. I picked a remote trail in the Pacific Northwest, one I had hiked before. The map showed a simple loop, about 8 miles round trip. Nothing difficult, but about 3 miles in, I saw something strange, a narrow, overgrown path branching off from the main trail. It wasn't on my map. I should have ignored it, but I didn't. The second I stepped onto that path, the air changed. The breeze died. The forest fell unnaturally silent. No birds, no rustling leaves, just my own breathing. Still, I kept walking. The deeper I went, the worse it got. The trees were wrong, too tall, their trunks twisted and gnarled like something had been twisting them from the inside. The ground was soft, almost spongy beneath my boots, and then there was the smell, rotting meat. I told myself it was just a dead animal nearby. Then I saw the cabin. It was old, half-rotten, barely standing. The windows were broken, the door hanging open like a gaping mouth. I don't know why, but I stepped inside. The air was thick with dust and something worse, something sour, rancid. The floor was littered with bones. Small ones, animal, I told myself. Had to be. And then I saw the pictures, faded, yellowed photographs covering the walls. Dozens of them. All of them were of people. Hikers, judging by their clothes. Some looked happy, smiling at the camera. Others didn't. Their expressions were frozen in fear, their eyes wide, their mouths slightly open as if they had been caught mid-scream. I took a step back, my boot crunching on something. A camera. I picked it up, my hands trembling. It was old, covered in dust, but the film was still inside. I swallowed hard and turned toward the door. That's when I heard it. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, coming from outside. I held my breath. The footsteps stopped just outside the door, and then a whisper. "Come take a picture." I ran. I don't know how I made it out of that cabin. My legs felt like lead, but I ran faster than I ever had in my life. The trees seemed closer now, pressing in, the branches reaching for me. The trail I had followed was gone. I didn't recognize anything. Then I heard the footsteps again, behind me, and the whispering. "Come take a picture." I didn't look back. I ran until my legs gave out, collapsing onto the dirt. When I opened my eyes, I was back on the main trail. The sun was setting. The overgrown path was gone, like it had never been there. I stumbled back to my car, barely able to breathe. My hands were still clenched around the camera. When I got home, I developed the film. There were only a few photos. The first showed a group of hikers I didn't recognize, their faces frozen in terror. The second, it was me, standing in front of the cabin, looking over my shoulder, and behind me, a figure, tall, shadowed, watching me. I don't hike anymore.
Story number 7.
I used to love hiking at night. There was something about the stillness of the woods, the way the world seemed frozen in time, that felt almost magical. I'd been doing it for years, never once afraid. I knew the trails like the back of my hand, every twist, every turn. But that changed last fall. That's when I saw it, the thing that still haunts me. It was a cool October night. A full moon hung low in the sky, casting long, eerie shadows across the trail. I was alone, just how I liked it. No distractions, no people, just me and the forest. I had hiked about 4 miles in when I saw something strange. A light, faint, flickering, like a lantern. It was just off the trail, deep in the trees. I stopped, staring. No one was supposed to be out here. This area wasn't popular, especially at night. I thought maybe it was another hiker, maybe someone lost. So I called out, "Hello?" No answer. The light didn't move. It just hovered between the trees, swaying slightly. I took a step closer. "Are you okay?" Still, no response. That's when I noticed something. The forest was silent. No wind, no crickets, no rustling leaves, nothing. A feeling of unease crept over me, but I ignored it. I pulled out my flashlight and shined it toward the light, and that's when I saw it. A figure, tall, impossibly thin, standing just beyond the reach of my flashlight's beam. Its head was tilted at an unnatural angle, its body completely still. But the worst part, it didn't have a face. Just smooth, pale skin where its eyes, nose, and mouth should have been. A wave of cold terror washed over me. Then the light, it went out. I turned and ran. I didn't care where I was going. I just needed to get away. Branches tore at my arms and legs. My breath came in ragged gasps, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Behind me. But they weren't normal. They were fast. Too fast. Like whatever was following me wasn't running. It was gliding. I risked a glance back. Nothing. Just darkness. But I could feel it. I could feel it watching me, whispering. Not words, but something else, something I felt deep in my bones. I ran until I saw the lights of my car through the trees. My legs ached, my lungs burned, but I pushed forward, practically throwing myself inside and slamming the door shut. I locked it. Then slowly I looked up, and there, standing at the edge of the forest, was the figure, motionless, watching. Even without a face, I knew it was staring right at me. I don't know how long I sat there, too afraid to move, but eventually it was just gone, like it had never been there. I don't hike at night anymore, but sometimes when I'm driving down dark, empty roads, I see something in my rearview mirror. A tall, thin figure standing just at the edge of the trees, watching, waiting.
Story number 8.
I never should have gone back to Raven's Hollow. I grew up in a small town near the Appalachian Mountains, surrounded by endless woods and old ghost stories. The one we feared the most was about Raven's Hollow, an abandoned trail deep in the forest. The legend said that something lived there, something that lured people in and never let them leave. We all knew someone who had lost a relative out there. No bodies were ever found, just disappearances. When I was 17, my best friend Kevin and I decided to hike the trail. We thought the stories were just that, stories. We wanted to prove we weren't scared. We never made it to the end. Halfway through, Kevin vanished. 1 second, he was ahead of me, laughing, and the next, he was gone. No sound, no struggle, just gone. I ran. I didn't stop running until I burst out of the trees, gasping for air. They never found Kevin, and I never went back. Until last year. I got a message in the middle of the night. No number, just a text. Help me. My hands shook as I typed back. Who is this? The response came immediately. It's Kevin. I felt sick. This had to be a joke. Kevin had been gone for over 10 years. Then another text came through. Come to Raven's Hollow, please. I didn't sleep that night. By morning, I had convinced myself that someone was messing with me. But deep down, I wasn't sure. So I went back. The trail looked the same. Dark, overgrown, suffocatingly silent. The air was thick, heavy, pressing against my skin. I walked slowly, my heart pounding with every step. Then I saw it. A figure, standing in the middle of the trail. Kevin. His clothes were the same ones he wore the day he disappeared. His skin was pale, almost gray. But his eyes, they were wrong. Too dark, too empty. I stepped forward. Kevin, move. Is it really you? I whispered. His mouth stretched into a grin, too wide, too unnatural. Then, in a voice that wasn't quite his, he said, You came back. A chill ran down my spine. Something was wrong. I took a step back. Then he twitched. His head jerked to the side, his arms bending at odd angles. His mouth still grinned, but his eyes, his hollow, black eyes, never blinked. Stay, he whispered. I turned and ran. Branches tore at my arms, my breath came in gasps, but I didn't stop. Then I heard the laughter. Not Kevin's. Something else. Something in the trees, all around me. I felt it behind me. Too close, too fast. I reached my car, fumbling with the keys. I yanked the door open and jumped inside, locking it. Then, slowly, I looked up. Kevin stood outside the window. His grin was wider now, his head tilted. And then, his lips moved. But the voice came from inside the car. You came back. I slammed on the gas, speeding away, refusing to look in the rearview mirror. I don't know what I saw that night, but Kevin is gone, and something else is in his place. Sometimes, late at night, I get more texts. Come back. I never respond, but I know one day it'll come for me.
Story number 9.
I don't know why I picked up the camera. I was hiking alone in the Blue Ridge Mountains, something I'd done dozens of times before. I liked the solitude, the peace of being away from everything. That day, the sky was overcast, the air thick with the smell of damp earth. I had planned a simple loop, nothing too extreme. About 4 miles in, I saw something unusual. A camera. It was sitting in the middle of the trail, old but still intact, its leather strap curled in the dirt. It looked expensive. I hesitated. Someone had to have lost it. Maybe another hiker. I picked it up, brushing the dirt from its surface. The lens was cracked, but the body was mostly undamaged. Then I noticed something strange. The power light was on. That didn't make sense. It must have been out here for days, maybe weeks. The battery should have been dead. Curious, I flipped through the pictures. The first few were normal. Shots of trees, the trail, a campfire. Nothing unusual. Then the next photo sent a chill down my spine. It was a picture of me, standing on the trail, wearing the same clothes I had on that day. My stomach dropped. That wasn't possible. I flipped to the next one. It was another photo of me, closer this time. My back was turned, like I didn't know the picture was being taken. I spun around, heart pounding, scanning the trees. Nothing. The forest was silent. Too silent. I looked back at the camera, my hands shaking as I pressed the button again. The next picture, me, even closer. But now there was something behind me, a figure, tall, just barely visible in the shadows. Its limbs were long, too long. Its head tilted at an unnatural angle. I was breathing too hard. My fingers felt numb. I flipped again. Another picture. This time, I wasn't in it, just the trees. But the figure was closer now, watching. I shut off the camera, my skin crawling. This was a joke. Had to be. I shoved the camera into my pack and started moving. Fast. I needed to get back to my car. The air was different now, heavier. The forest seemed darker, the trees pressing in closer. My footsteps felt too loud, echoing in the unnatural silence. Then, a click. I froze. The sound had come from behind me, like a camera shutter. I turned slowly. Nothing, just the empty trail. Then I heard it again. Click. Right next to my ear. I ran. I didn't care where I was going. I just had to move. My breath was ragged, my legs burning. The trees blurred past me. Then, another sound. Not the camera. Footsteps. Heavy, deliberate. I didn't look back. I kept running until I saw the break in the trees, my car just beyond the clearing. I nearly collapsed as I reached it, fumbling with my keys. My hands were shaking too much to get them in the lock. Click. I froze. The sound had come from inside my car. I looked up. The camera was sitting on the passenger seat. I never put it there, and the screen was on. A new picture. Not of the trees, not of the trail, of me, sitting in the driver's seat. But there was something behind me, something smiling. I don't remember starting the car, I don't remember driving home, but when I got there, the camera was gone. And that night, as I lay in bed, my phone buzzed with a new notification. A picture of me, sleeping. I don't hike alone anymore.